Hi, this is Teresa Martin with Lower Cape TV, and welcome to Legislative Update. With me today is State Senator Julian and State Representative Sarah Peake. Welcome.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi, Teresa.
Thanks.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and so it's February, things are up and running, and assignments for committees have happened, right?
That's right. Both the House and the Senate caucused yesterday. We caucused separately, but it was great because it was a coordinated thing. It was all sort of going on at the same time. I was very pleased to be reassigned to my leadership position as a floor division leader, or like a floor whip, but which is great because it gives, I mean, it's good for me, but it's really, I'm happy about it because it's good for my constituents. It gives us on the Cape a seat at the table. But speaking of a seat at the table, you know, mine is a reappointment. The senator has unbelievably exciting news, and you know, I'll just say in the vernacular, when you hear what he's been assigned to, you will understand. I mean, he is a rock star in this. So Julian, tell him what your assignments
Stop blushing
are.
and tell us.
Yes.
So I was assigned to, as well, the Senate President Spoka's leadership team as the Assistant Majority Whip. So actually in a very similar role to
That's
Sarah's.
right.
And so both Sarah and I are one of the 9 members in both our respective bodies who are in leadership, so who are at the table when conversations, you know, in the House and the Senate respectively are happening about, you know, what legislation are we going to prioritize? What are we going to vote on? What should we push? You know, it's very significant, particularly to have, you know, we're a pretty, you know, sparse region. You know, the legislators from Provincetown and Truro, respectively, you know, aren't often, or maybe if ever, have been in these positions at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think that the Cape and Islands, with the exception perhaps of when Terry Murray was the Senate president, I don't think the Cape and Islands have ever had more clout in the state legislature. Now, this doesn't mean that Julian and I were issued magic wands and we can just,
Oh, darn.
I know, and that we can just do whatever it is we want to do. But our ability to now have a seat at the table and help craft statewide policy and help craft what the priorities should be for the legislature moving forward, the myriad ways in which we can help people, and ultimately the myriad ways in which we can help our constituents individually and collectively. This is very, very important stuff. And it dovetails beautifully also with our Republican colleagues who have close working relationships, not that we don't, but close working relationships with the Baker-Polito administration. Tim Whalen's been assigned again to the House Committee on Ways and Means. So, you know, he's over there on the numbers side. Dave Vieira's on the House Bonding Committee, so any capital projects run through there. So I think we as Team Cape Cod have really come out of these assignments looking very strong and very united, and it's very exciting.
And so when we take up big issues, right, we think we're going to do something on healthcare reform, education, and looking at education funding, we're both going to be in the room bending the Senate President's ear, bending the Speaker's ear on, you know, on what this means for Cape Cod, for Martha's Vineyard, for Nantucket. So it's significant, particularly in being able to steer the conversation. So much of, you know, let's face it, Greater Boston is sort of a big sort of dominant force in numbers, just in who has a seat at the table and population.
That's right.
So to be able to get that Cape Cod perspective in there is important, and I think we have a real track record of being able to identify, you know, problems that we're facing, which we're a pretty unique place, right?
Right.
A peninsula out in the Atlantic Ocean. To be able to get attention to those issues, to be able to craft solutions to those problems, and make some progress. The other committee that I've been assigned to, I'm chair of mental health, substance use, and recovery on the Senate side of that. Huge issue for us, certainly with the opioid epidemic. Also in looking at mental health access and parity. For geographically isolated communities out here, it's a big challenge. And for the Senate President, this is her #1 personal priority. She's a social worker by training. She cares a lot about this, has struggled with this in her own family. So that's going to be an exciting policy issue to really sink my teeth into. And then also, you know, look at places like on the Outer Cape and the Lower Cape where, you know, you really struggle in getting mental health care. We have a disproportionate need if you look at, you know, our population and health metrics.
I've heard stories.
So it's going to be exciting stuff.
I've heard stories of people in the Outer Cape being told, well, if you need to get state services, go to Taunton.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Well,
And-
yeah, the state hospital there, which
Right.
thankfully wasn't closed by Governor Patrick. But right,
Driving to Taunton is just not,
and for people, for families, and thinking of families in a broader sense, who are there to help support the person who's struggling with these issues. From Truro to Taunton is a pretty hefty round trip to
Yes.
make, and to participate in family sessions and that kind of thing. It's really tough. So it's great that Julian has this perch, and it's not only great for Cape Codders, but I just sat in this week on a meeting. I'm one of the co-chairs of what we call the Rural Caucus. So we have Ann Goby on the Senate side, who is from the Greater Worcester area. We have Adam Hines, who's from the Berkshires, myself from the Cape, and Paul Mark from a little community called Peru, not the nation of, but a little community called Peru, out in the Berkshires. I tell him, I always ask him, "Oh, did you take a donkey today to get to the State House?"
He appreciates that, I'm sure.
Exactly. But we've formed this rural caucus to look at things like what's the adequacy of public transportation. We do an awful lot of work through tax credits to invite companies to open up, let's say, in Boston or within the 495 ring around Boston. But you know what? We need jobs and economic opportunity out in rural areas as well. What's broadband access? What's the ability for people to do various types of work from home? Because so many people today don't go to an office to work, whether you're in an urban area or not, the number of people working away from home. We already have a Rural Policy Commission. They need some help. They need some financing. They need professional staff. So the four of us from we've called it the Rural Caucus. We could call it the Hinterland Caucus, but we're working together to make sure, whether it's Berkshire County or Barnstable County, that we're getting a fair shake in the legislature. And quite honestly, the fact that Julian and I hold these leadership positions, it's going to be helpful to people in the Berkshires as well as to people in Barnstable County.
That's so exciting, because I know for years I've heard people here say over and over, we don't always feel like we're part of Massachusetts. Right? We're kind of off here. You go over the bridge and no one remembers us.
That's right.
So that's really, really exciting.
Well, you're not only remembered, we're thinking about you in a positive and proactive way.
Yeah,
Yay.
and not just in the summer, right? Not those 8 weeks in the summer
right.
when everyone wants to come down here, right? And really being able to make the case of the needs that we have in our communities, and we have significant needs, and whether it's on housing affordability, climate change and climate resiliency work we've been thinking a lot about, or a big task has been around wastewater, and how do we ensure that the marine and fresh waters that frankly attract tens of thousands, millions of visitors for year after year to come here, how do we steward that for our future? And so we've been doing a lot of work on that as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the climate, because there's been a lot of talk at the national level about how do we address this whole green initiative, and what's happening at the state level? Are we tapped in at all?
Well, that's very interesting, because as we know, our Massachusetts' very own Senator Ed Markey is the lead sponsor on the Senate side of the Green New Deal.
Right.
And what they're proposing, there's not a lot of specifics, but what they're proposing is not getting beyond a hodgepodge approach or ways of reducing our carbon output in the way we live today, but fundamentally shifting the way we live, getting to a zero emissions public transit system, getting people out of their individual cars and into a robust public transit system. When we build housing, to ensure that it's carbon neutral, and really thinking about things in a global way, as opposed to, well, we need a carbon tax because we're going to charge people for the amount of carbon that they're putting into the atmosphere. What the senator's vision is let's not talk about taxing people for putting carbon into the atmosphere, but how can we get to a zero carbon?
So instead of being transactional about climate,
Exactly.
being literally
More
changing and shifting the mindset of.
Exactly. So the more I've read about this, and there was a great editorial in the New York Times just yesterday, and the more I've looked at what we're doing on the state level, I feel like, not to be pejorative about it, but on the state level, it's almost like we're playing whack-a-mole with a carbon tax here and a zero emissions goal here. And yes, we are leaders in the nation with renewable energy, both with our offshore wind projects and hydro from Canada and all of that. But I thought, I wonder if anybody is looking at the big picture in the way the senator is. So actually, just today, I reached out to his Southeast Regional Director, Rory Clark, and I said, hey, I'm very excited by what the senator's doing. I've got a couple of climate change bills that I've filed myself. I have some opportunity and bandwidth to really work on this, and I would love to partner with the Senator's office, even if it's just to bring programming to the State House, to raise awareness for our colleagues, to reach out to the Baker-Polito administration, and make sure that we in Massachusetts continue to be leaders. And certainly here on Cape Cod, we're sort of in the crucible of really seeing the effects of climate change. Every winter as we lose more literally of our land mass here, and we see the effects of climate change. So I think there'll be more to come on that, and there's an opportunity to work collaboratively, with the U.S. Congress, with our legislative body here in Massachusetts, and so often we've found that as things get bogged down in D.C., we've kind of have to take up the reins in Massachusetts to make up for that sort of legislative logjam that can happen there. So I'm hoping for an opportunity to work with the Senator and really get some stuff moving here.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Sometimes the state level is the right scale to make these changes on. That federal is almost too big. It's everywhere. But we
Although
can
if
control
they
what we can
adopt-
control.
Yeah, but if they adopt the vision and have money that follows it, it's
Yeah.
always great to
Like
have
that.
their help with
Yeah, oh,
with
yes.
the financing of things.
Yeah,
too.
I think you need both,
Yeah.
and that we can be real laboratories of democracy, but also the challenges we face are so significant. Are bigger than us here on Cape Cod, bigger in Massachusetts, right? And if we don't act in a national, even global level,
Right.
Yes, we need to keep doing things here. I've got some legislation to allow municipalities to opt in to be 100% renewable, looking at access for more solar in historic districts, looking at net zero housing, right? All these kind of pieces. But even if we get all those done, we need that federal action. So I think what we're trying to, what's great to have, and the support from Senator Markey on this, but it's really that they're pushing at the federal level, that we're working in concert at the state level. And I think that we're really challenging, our colleagues in the Baker-Polito administration to say, all right, we need to be doing everything we can here in Massachusetts, and we need the federal action, and then maybe just we can, you got a life here for the next several hundred years on this little peninsula.
I'd like to be around.
And we need to do it quickly, right? I mean, as each report gets issued and comes out. Back when we did the Green Communities Act, 2050 seemed like a good goal to get to. Now we realize we can't be fooling around with this between now and 2050. We're looking at target dates of 2030, with other things for 2035, 2040, and we've got to really shorten that timeline, because we see the effects, not only environmental effects, but we're going to start to really see effects on our economy as well, especially in a place like the Cape, where the fishing economy is still so important, and aquaculture and shellfishing. Nothing is a greater threat to that, to either one of those industries, than climate change.
I know. I hear about ocean acidification and the effect on shellfish.
Yes.
And the shift in the species of fish
Yes.
that are
seeing
here,
that, yep.
which
Right.
is, it's hard to even articulate what that could mean for us.
Right.
And we actually have an Ocean Acidification Commission that we got passed last session.
Right.
That's another piece. There's the work that you do to get legislation passed, and then there's the implementation. Certainly on ocean acidification, wastewater is something that Sarah and I have spent a tremendous amount of time. Yes, getting the creation of this Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund created, which is something that we were able to get done through the short-term room occupancy bill, but now really working on the implementation of it, working with our town partners, to do so. So that's coming up. I think another big urgent piece that we have for the region is housing. Attainable housing is just, we have just become a profoundly unaffordable place to live. And so what we've tried to do, I actually filed a bill, an act relative to attainable housing in seasonal communities. And I think we're going to see a housing production bill come out this session.
Yes.
Greater Boston certainly hasn't kept up with housing production. But trying to figure out, all right, when we do that, how do we look at policies and solutions that we need here in Eastham and Truro and Wellfleet and Provincetown, that we need across the region, that's going to make a difference, because we've got a different problem going on. And so what we were able to do is to take 12 ideas that came from our partners in towns, from realtors, from builders, from planners, put that into a bill, some of which are pretty common sense and basic stuff that the state should do, other things that are a little more avant-garde, And so we're going to be trying to advance that conversation, as an example of how we advance Cape Cod interests in these larger conversations, in these larger bills, and then hopefully you get something like the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund, like our efforts on climate change, that you make sure that we're included in that effort.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about housing. I'm curious if you're looking at any of the effort that has been started in California under the new governor, because I was reading some of the stuff, and it's incredibly parallel to here.
Yes.
Talking about increasing density, about this whole concept, they call them casitas, but we'd call them accessory dwelling units, right?
I kind of like a casita better than ADU.
Yeah.
It's a little,
are we learning any lessons across state boundaries? Because we're all struggling with this.
All that's on the radar screen. And the zoning bill that I never got across the goal line, but that I toiled over for probably 6 or 8 years, it's interesting, it was a comprehensive bill. Now it's been blown apart into, instead of one bill, I think there's maybe 14 separate pieces of legislation. But one of them has to do with accessory dwelling. Another bill has to do with allowing density bonus to preserve open space. You can get a density bonus if you build everything off in one piece of the parcel. So absolutely, all that is on the radar. People keep bringing up tiny homes. Right now, they're prohibited. But
That's on our
maybe,
bill. Yep.
but maybe as we build wastewater infrastructure, people on boats tie up at a marina, and their wastewater needs and issues are dealt with there. So really, in some way, or you go to an RV park and they're dealt with. So for tiny homes, in particular for seasonal housing, I mean, I think now that we've put the wastewater piece in place, and we've got some money in various bond bills, I think things are set in place nicely to start pursuing some of these creative solutions.
To me, some of this seems to tie into the cold climate discussion, because if you're going to insist on living on 1 and 2 acre lots with 4-bedroom houses and 4-car garages, you can't separate that housing mindset from the carbon impact it has.
That's right.
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
I think it all ties in nicely. Yeah.
So, okay, so we're in the new thing. We talked a little bit about some things that are in action. What are going to be some of the top things coming up? We got about a minute left. So what are the top 3 things we're looking at coming onto the agenda now?
Well, the House is going to be taking up the budget. The Ways and Means Chair was just appointed. There'll be hearings held around the Commonwealth in March, and we'll see mid-April the House version of the budget. The last week in April we'll debate it, and then it kicks over to the Senate, and they do that in May. So there'll be a lot of focus around that. Already Julian and I are spending our Fridays, along with the rest of the Cape delegation, visiting various stakeholders and nonprofit entities, the hospitals, Veterans Association, the college, 4Cs, all of this. Everybody has their monetary ask. So we'll be getting together as a delegation, prioritizing what those asks are and fighting to make sure that we get our fair share down here on the Cape.
So we've joked before about the seasons of the State
Yeah,
House.
we're going into budget season.
Budget
I think certainly the budget, which is sort of the biggest thing we do. I think you're also going to see a housing production bill, which I mentioned. Mental health parity, really important for us to get this right, and then healthcare reform.
Yes.
40% plus of our budget is mass health. When you add in all the other healthcare work that we do, it's almost 50% of a $41 billion budget's healthcare. And so, that's something where we advanced. We got quite far last session, didn't get over the finish line. I think you'll see that come back. And then there's always things that emerge, through the session. And so, a lot of work. Like it's an exciting time. A lot of work to do, but neither of us are shy about doing work.
That's
so,
right. We've got
our sleeves are already rolled up.
We got our running shoes on.
Yeah,
We're ready to go.
Yeah.
Well, we have good stuff going on now. Congratulations again on your respective assignments.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to talking budget, start a budget next
Absolutely.
time,
Fantastic.
and following up on these other topics.
Great.
So once again, this is Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV. Thank you for joining us with this month's legislative update with State Rep Sarah Peake and State Senator Julian Cyr. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.